The fire pierces the darkness. Why would God refuse to let a man die? Have you ever considered that someone might escape death not by their own strength, but because God himself decided it? Imagine the biting wind in the desert, lifting sand as flames erupt from nowhere, a blaze that doesn't just burn dry brush, but consumes the very boundary between life and death. Today I want to tell you about one of the Bible's greatest mysteries, a story so strange that many people avoid even talking about it. A prophet who never found a grave, a fire that swallowed his body without leaving it in ashes, a sky that opened to carry him away alive. Have you ever wondered if there was someone God prevented from dying, not by fleeing but by divine choice? And more importantly, why would God do that? What was he trying to prove to those left watching? Feel that heavy silence. Imagine the dry heat against your face. The sound of the wind growing stronger, as if it carries a warning. This is not a legend meant to entertain us. It is a sign, a message that travels through centuries. Today, you're going to discover why God did something impossible and what he expects of you through this story. Stay with me until the end, because we're going to walk together through this biblical mystery. And the answer to this secret might change the way you see your own life. When the fire falls, there's no way to pretend nothing has changed. When the wind howls in the dark, we feel fear, and at the same time, a deep calling. What if God asked you to follow a path with no way back? Would you say yes? Let's step together into this biblical story that holds a mystery guarded for centuries. Let's uncover the secrets of Scripture that burn like embers in the chest and force us to choose, run away or trust. Before we go on, I want to invite you to like this video, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. And if this message touches your heart today, write in the comments, "I trust." It's a way to publicly declare your living faith, showing God and the world that you choose to trust his purpose, even when you don't understand everything. Share this video with someone who needs to hear this message today. Let's spread the word together and strengthen this mission. Now, take a deep breath, listen to the wind, feel the heat of the flames. Today we're going to walk through a desert where each step could be the last or the first of a journey that ends straight in heaven. So, are you ready to meet the prophet whom God refused to let die? The ground cracked beneath the merciless sun. The earth split into deep fissures, as if exposing ancient wounds. It was more than a natural disaster. It was judgment. In that parched landscape, Elijah appeared at the royal palace. He brought no gifts or requests, only a sentence. He was a prophet, and he knew the weight of the words he carried. Standing before King Ahab, he spoke without hesitation. There would be neither dew nor rain until further notice. It was no empty threat. It was a decree from the living God. Soldiers tightened their grip on their swords as the king clenched his teeth. There was no dialogue there. Only a confrontation between God's promise and corrupt human power. As the days passed, the punishment became inescapable. Fields withered, animals collapsed, mothers watched the feverish glint in the eyes of their thirsty children. It was a collective pain that exposed the emptiness of idols. Elijah knew there was no turning back. Being a prophet meant carrying a harsh truth to the very end. There was no honor in the palace halls for someone who spoke what no one wanted to hear. But even in the severity of the punishment, God kept his word to his messenger. He did not command an attack, but a retreat. It might have seemed like cowardice in the world's eyes. In truth, it was absolute obedience. He left behind the court, the insults, the veiled threats. He walked into the desert, feeling the relentless heat on his skin. Each step seemed to pose a question. Would you trust an invisible promise? Amid the burning silence, Elijah received clear instructions. God revealed a hidden brook, a shelter where water still flowed. There he would be fed in a mysterious way, sustained while everyone else was dying of hunger. The prophet understood he was entirely dependent on the very word he had proclaimed. He was as vulnerable as the people, but guided by a different certainty. In the first book of Kings, chapter 17, verse 3, we read the call, "Get thee hence, and turn thee eastward, and hide thyself by the brook Cherith." That detail says it all. Even in judgment, there was a path of grace. Even in the midst of drought, a thread of life for those who trusted. Elijah had no elaborate escape plan, only trust in a voice that did not lie. The same sky that seemed like bronze over Israel still held a promise for those who obeyed. He went. Dust clung to his sweaty skin, his lips cracked. But the prophet kept going, remembering there is no easy truth, and that courage is not making noise, but listening and acting. As he disappeared into the dry expanse, something was changing in the spiritual realm. God was still speaking, and he was preparing the hearts of those willing to listen. The desert would not be the end. It was only the beginning of something greater. And when the time came, Elijah emerged from hiding to face a crowd. The silence of the desert would be replaced by anxious voices, waiting to see who truly was God. The people gathered on Mount Carmel as if attending a trial. The air was thick, heavy with expectation. Murmurs moved like wind among the rocks. Hundreds of prophets of Baal lined up in colorful robes, their faces painted for ritual. Before them stood only one man, a prophet. Elijah had no army, no sword. He had only a promise. He did not speak for himself, but for a God who did not hide in idols of stone. He raised his voice so all could hear. "Prepare 2 young bulls, place them on the wood, but do not light a fire." Each side would call upon its God. The one who answered with fire would be acknowledged as the true God. Can you feel the weight of challenging an entire nation, of standing alone against political, religious, and popular power? The crowd held its breath. The prophets of Baal began to dance and shout, cutting their own flesh to provoke a response. Their cries sounded like the wails of those begging from emptiness. But there was no answer, no fire, no sound. Elijah watched in silence. This was not a contest. It was revelation. A clash between empty promises and the truth that refused to die. As the day wore on, he called the people closer. He asked them to rebuild the altar of the Lord, neglected and broken. Stone by stone, 12 in all, reminding them of the tribes of Israel. A simple act, but rich with memory. Then he did something even stranger. He ordered them to drench the sacrifice with water 3 times until everything was soaked and the trench around it overflowed. There was no trick, no room for deception. There, in deep silence, he prayed. He did not ask for glory for himself, but that God would reveal who he was, that the hearts of the people would turn back to the Lord. Would you have the courage to ask for fire from heaven, surrounded by doubt and mockery? That's when it happened. Fire fell from heaven with living violence. It consumed the bull, the wood, the stones, the water. Everything turned to ashes in an undeniable blaze. The people fell to the ground. There were no more arguments, no more hesitation. They acknowledged the Lord as the only God. As it is written in the first book of Kings, chapter 18, verse 38, the fire of the Lord even consumed the water in the trench. Elijah did not smile. He knew this was not just a victory, it was judgment. Clouds gathered on the horizon, heavy with the promise of rain, but also heavy with new threats. Because even those who see fire from heaven can choose persecution. And while the people still trembled, Elijah understood that this victory came at a price, because the road ahead would not be less dangerous, only clearer. The fire on Mount Carmel had burned out, but its consequences smoldered like embers beneath ashes. The people were in shock, kneeling before the truth, but not everyone would bow. Jezebel had not seen fire from heaven, but she felt her authority threatened. She sent a cruel message. Elijah would be dead before sunset. It was no bluff. It was a sentence. The news hit the prophet's ears like thunder that needed no cloud. Suddenly, the man who had faced crowds found himself alone once more. There was no consumed altar left to prove anything, no shouts of victory, only the sound of his own fear echoing in his chest. He turned his back on Carmel and fled. There was no honor in running, but there was survival. And it wasn't a planned escape. It was a flight with no direction, guided only by the desperate will to live one more day. The path through the desert seemed to mock every promise he had ever trusted. The sand cold at night, burning by day. The wind cutting like a dull knife. Elijah walked until his legs gave out, until his chest ached from swallowing dust. At last he found a solitary bush, a twisted, thin juniper. There he collapsed to the ground, defeated not by armies, but by exhaustion. "Lord, enough." The words came out as a sigh, a lament. It wasn't a cry of anger, it was surrender. He didn't ask for deliverance. He asked to die. Have you ever felt that way? As if the burden was too heavy even for prayer. Elijah didn't ask for victory, he only wanted an end. Life had become a broken promise in his hands. The mission felt like failure. Silence wrapped him like a shroud. No thunder, no fire, no mighty voice from heaven. Only the crushing weight of someone who no longer wanted to fight, but God was there, without fanfare, without spectacle. When Elijah fell asleep, he was awakened by an unexpected touch. An angel roused him, not with a flaming sword, but with bread baked on hot stones and a jar of water. "Get up and eat." It was a command full of tenderness, a divine refusal of his plea for death. Elijah ate slowly, swallowing more tears than bread. Then, exhausted, he tried to sleep again, as if refusing to live even when nourished. But the angel returned, touched him once more. "Get up and eat, for the journey will be too much for you." Could it be that courage is also accepting to live when everything in you wants to give up? In the first book of Kings, chapter 19, verse 7, it is written that the angel of the Lord urged him, reminding Elijah of his weakness and the road ahead. The prophet understood he would not die there. Not because he was strong, but because God would not allow it. He rose slowly, his body aching, his face burned by sun and shame. But there was something new in his eyes, not the strength of a conqueror, but the humility of someone willing to go on. The desert would not be his grave, it would be a passage. There was a mountain waiting for him, an encounter in the silence. And as the cold wind blew, Elijah took the first step toward Horeb, with no answers, but with a promise that would not let him die. The long walk to Horeb was made in silence. There were no witnesses, only the dry sound of footsteps on stone. The wind howled among the rocks as if trying to drive him away. Elijah arrived exhausted. He found a dark cave and crawled inside like someone wanting to disappear from the world. There was no throne, no altar, no one to see his shame. He was a broken man, hiding even from God. Inside, the silence offered no peace, it offered confrontation. His conscience throbbed with memories of Carmel, the flight, the plea for death. He was not invincible, he was not pure fire, he was dust. But then God spoke, not with immediate thunder, not with accusation, just a question whispered to his soul. "What are you doing here, Elijah?" It wasn't divine ignorance. It was an invitation to look at himself. Elijah answered with the weight of a man carrying wounds. "I have been very zealous, but Israel has broken your covenant, killed your prophets. I am the only one left, and now they want to take my life." There was a moment when the wind roared so fiercely it tore rocks loose. The earth shook with a dull thunder. Fire lit up the sky and licked the cliffs. But God was not in any of these. Have you ever waited for God in the noise, only to realize he comes in the silence? Then, in an almost imperceptible whisper, the voice came, not to humiliate, but to guide. Calmly, God repeated his question and gave clear instructions. "Go, you will anoint Hazael as king over Syria, Jehu as king over Israel, and Elisha as prophet in your place." Or in the first book of Kings, chapter 19, verse 15, It is written that the Lord told Elijah to return by the desert road and carry out this mission. It was ascending, a new chance. There was no promise of an easy life, but there was purpose. Elijah took a deep breath in the darkness of the cave. He felt the echo of the voice that did not crush him, but held him up. He understood he was not dismissed. There was still a promise. You might think courage means shouting loudly, but sometimes it is hearing a gentle voice telling you to keep going. Elijah emerged from the cave with a face marked by days of fleeing and sleepless nights. But there was something new in his expression. No longer pure fear, but acceptance. He had not received easy explanations, only orders, and as hard as it was, he accepted. Because sometimes the greatest miracle is not fire falling from heaven, but a stubborn heart opening to obey. And there began the path back, not for his own glory, but to ensure that God's plan would not die with him. On the horizon, he thought of Elisha, the man he would have to find, the one who would inherit the mantle. And even without understanding everything, the prophet left Horeb ready to fulfill the voice that had called him in the silence. Elijah left Horeb with slow but steady steps. There was no longer a cave to hide his doubts. The dry wind struck his face, reminding him that the path was still hard. He descended the slope with renewed purpose. The gentle voice of God still echoed in his mind. He had clear orders, among them to find a man, Elisha. The landscape changed as he went. From barren rock, he descended into cultivated fields. Among 12 yoke of oxen, a man was working the soil with strength. He didn't look like a warrior or a priest, just a sweaty, focused farmer. Elijah stopped and watched him. There was no speech, no grand prophecy, just a silent gesture. He took off his mantle, the symbol of calling and authority, and cast it over Elisha's shoulders. Have you ever wondered if you would recognize a calling even without hearing a voice? Elisha shuddered at the weight of the fabric. He stopped plowing, looked at Elijah without questions. Inside him, something burned like fire, an invitation impossible to refuse, even without explanations. He left the oxen, the land, his home. He asked only for permission to say goodbye. Then he sacrificed the animals that sustained him. He broke the yoke to use it as firewood. He cooked the meat and gave it to the people. It was his farewell and his offering. There would be no return. He burned the way back. In the first book of Kings, chapter 19, verse 21, we see that Elisha arose, followed Elijah, and ministered to him. The older prophet watched it all with a mix of relief and weight. He knew he wasn't just calling a successor, he was sealing a promise. The legacy would not die with him. Elisha followed him without bargaining, without any guarantee of honor, only faith. There was something greater than a comfortable life or personal plans. Would you be willing to leave everything for a purpose you might not even live to see fulfilled? The sun set, tinting the sky red. Shadows lengthened across the now silent fields. Elijah felt the weariness in his body, but he was not the same man who had asked to die beneath the juniper bush. He had a companion at his side, someone to carry the mantle, someone willing to continue what God had begun. There was no celebration, no popular recognition, just two men walking side by side toward an unknown destiny. As they made their way to the Jordan, Elijah felt time slipping away. He didn't know how his journey would end, but he sensed it would not be with an ordinary death. There was a promise, a hint of being taken up that burned deep in his soul, like an ember about to become flame. And in the silence of the road, the prophet gripped the mantle more tightly. He knew he could not carry it forever. The path ahead was narrow, but it was wide enough for two. The path to the Jordan was walked in knowing silence. Two men, one older, the other learning to walk in the same faith. Neither knew exactly how that journey would end, but the air felt heavy, as if heaven itself were holding its breath. They arrived at the riverbank at dawn. The waters ran calmly, reflecting a clear sky. Elijah stopped, looked at Elisha and took off his mantle. He rolled it tightly like a sturdy staff and with a decisive motion struck the water's surface. The waters parted into two walls of liquid, revealing a dry path. Elisha held his breath as he watched the miracle unfold before his eyes, and they walked side by side through what had once been impossible. The sun climbed slowly, bathing everything in gold. With every step, Elijah felt his heart beating harder. There was no more time. He knew it. Elisha seemed to sense it too, but said nothing. When they reached the other side, Elijah stopped and broke the silence. "Ask what you want me to do for you before I am taken from you." Elisha did not hesitate. His voice came out firm, almost pleading. "Let a double portion of your spirit be upon me." Would you have the courage to ask for something so great? To want to carry the weight someone else bore, but doubled? Elijah looked at him with solemn gravity. "You have asked a hard thing, but if you see me when I am taken from you, it shall be so." They continued walking, each step feeling like it carried centuries. Then it happened. The ground trembled slightly. A sound like wild wind filled the air. From the sky burst forth a chariot of fire, drawn by horses of fire, cutting the horizon with living light. The flames did not burn like ordinary fire. They were pure, brilliant, almost alive. Elijah felt his body lifted. There was no pain, only an irresistible force pulling him from the earth. His eyes met Elisha's one last time. There was acceptance and an unspoken promise. The prophet was taken up to heaven in fire. He vanished in a blaze that seemed to fuse earth and sky into one flame. Elisha cried out, tearing his clothes. Tears burned down his face. He ran to where the mantle had fallen. He seized it tightly, feeling the heavy symbolism now resting on him. In the second book of Kings, chapter 2, verse 11, we read that Elijah went up to heaven in a whirlwind of fire, leaving behind a burning legacy for the one who remained. The wind still swirled around them, as if trying to guard the mystery. Elisha took a deep breath. There was no choice but to go on. He turned back toward the Jordan. He held the mantle in trembling fingers. He knew nothing would ever be the same. And in the silence that followed, the sky seemed to watch, waiting for the next act of this promise that burned alive. The wind that had witnessed the fire was now calm. The sky was clear, as if nothing had happened. But those who saw it would never forget. Elisha held the mantle with tense fingers. He could still feel the heat of that fire that did not burn flesh, but set the soul ablaze. The prophet had been taken up, carried alive to heaven, denied to death. Why did God refuse to let Elijah die like any other man? It wasn't empty privilege. It was a sign, a reminder that the Lord alone decides when life ends, and that even death holds no final power over those who carry his promise. Elijah wasn't merely a bold or miracle-working prophet. He was a foreshadowing, a living warning that one day there would be victory over the grave. Have you ever considered that there are moments when God says no, even to our pleas to give up? When Elijah begged to die, God said no, because there was still a path ahead. There were people who needed him. There was a legacy to pass on. The fiery ascent was not a reward for works. It was a demonstration of divine power, a promise sealed in flames that nothing limits God, not even the final human breath. In the second book of Kings, chapter 2, verse 11, we read that Elijah went up to heaven in a whirlwind of fire. He left no bones, no grave, no epitaph, only the living memory of a promise that does not fade. Maybe today you feel exhausted, without strength to keep going, thinking the only way out is the end. But God still has planned. He refuses your end when there is still something He wants to do in you and through you. Will you choose to live even when you wanted to give up? Perhaps your greatest act of courage isn't facing crowds or calling down fire from heaven, but simply continuing to breathe, continuing to say yes to God's purpose when everything in you screams, enough. Elijah reminds us that death does not have the final word when God is still speaking. that there are no boundaries to his promise. That is why he did not let Elijah die like any other man, to show us there is life beyond the end, that there is a taking up for those who trust, even without understanding. The fire that carried him to heaven did not destroy, it revealed. Now the wind calms, the fire fades, and the sky waits in silence for our answer. Write in the comments, "I choose to live," if you believe God still has plans for you. Declare your living faith. Inspire others to do the same. And if this message spoke to your heart today, like this video, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications to receive other biblical stories. Share it with someone who needs this word today. Let's spread the word together and strengthen this mission. May God bless your life with courage and trust to fulfill His purpose. Thank you for being here. I hope to see you in other biblical stories as we discover the secrets of Scripture together. May God's grace always be with you.